Okay, so hello and welcome to this video. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to repair a faulty fan that makes a grinding or whirling or loud noise from these Marshall amps. Now this particular one is an MG100DFX, but a lot of these type and series of Marshall amps, and even the heads, the combos, etc., have got an issue with the cooling fans, in which that when you turn them on, for a while they make a very loud noise, or it can start off quiet but it gets worse, which is to do with the fan dying in the unit basically, or like the bearing of it, until it gets going, and then it usually stops and it'll be okay. But it's very annoying anyway, so I'll just demonstrate it now if it'll do it. So you can hear that now. If I pull it forward, you can hear that the noise is coming from the cooling fan. And it's pretty awful. So, I'm going to be showing you how to change the fan in these yourself. Now it's relatively easy. I'll show you what you're going to need to do it in a second, but the main thing is to find a replacement fan. Now, the fans in this are nothing special. All they are is 50mm, which is the diameter corner to corner, so across that way or that way, 50mm, but the thickness, they have to be 10mm. So it's a 50mm by 10mm fan, and this is a 3-pin computer type fan. You only actually need a 2-pin one, and it's 12 volts DC. So if you notice there, you can see DC fan, DC 12 volt. This is a rather cheap one. This was purchased from a store close to me, so I actually went and picked this up, but you can get them online, various sites, eBay, Amazon, etc. Now you only need a 2-pin version with just the red and black wires. This is a 3-pin because it's actually a computer fan, but you can also use a 3 or 4-pin, whatever. As long as the dimensions are okay and it's 12 volts DC, all you do is hook up the red and black. And I'll show you how to actually hook it up and change it now. Okay, so to do this, there's a couple of different ways in which you can actually join the new fan. So most fans probably won't have the right connector for the amp on them, so you'll probably have to cut the plug off this and cut the cable off the old fan and join them. My preferred way of doing that would be to use a soldering iron, if you've got one or you know someone who has, because you could even take the old and new fan to them and get them to do it. And what I'd do is I cut them, solder them together, and put heat shrink tubing on. So this is what this is here. You slide that over, heat it up, and it shrinks down to seal the connection. The other tools you're going to need for doing this is going to be a Phillips or crosshead screwdriver, some wire cutters to actually cut the wires and join them, and cutting cable ties and things as well. You could use bigger cutters if that's all that you've got. The smaller ones are generally better because we're only doing tiny wires. Now, if you can't solder, you haven't got any access to it, and you don't know anyone who has, you could use some sort of wire connection block, something like this, that you put the wires in and tighten up, chock block. Most people will probably know what these are, I'll be familiar with them. Or the other thing you could do is you could twist them together tightly and tape them up, but I would shy away from especially the twist and tape, because obviously something like this, it's going to be vibrating, and plus you're going to be throwing it around, taking it to events and gigs. It could well come loose quite easily. Same with these are not ideal to have floating around in there. So this is by far the best method if you can solder, or you know someone who can, or has got a soldering iron to just do this simple job. I'm going to do it the solder way, and that's the way I'm going to show you in this video. First thing we want to do is get the screwdriver, and we need to take the amp out of the actual shell. So if you've got a head or a combo, whatever, it'll be similar, but obviously each model may vary slightly with where the screws are or how many screws there are. Generally speaking, the amp is held in a combo from above and in a head from below. We should have 4 screws like this, and basically what you want to do is make sure that the power's unplugged. Then you want to loosen these screws. I generally take the front ones out first, because the front is rested on top of the speaker grill here, whereas the back end will just drop when you take the screws out. So there's one screw out. Don't forget not to lose these little washers either. Screw number 2's out. So that's the front loose. Now I generally turn this around, and at the back here there's a little slot here where you can get your hand under on this particular one. Unplug the speaker as well. and put your hand under as you're removing the back ones so that it doesn't just drop, just to support the amplifier. It'll only really drop when you take the last screw out, but I hope this is in shot, I can't actually see. Yeah, there's the last screw out there. I'll put that down there. And now you'll notice the amp itself is loose. If you just get hold of it and slide it out like so, might need a little bit of a jiggle. And there we go. That's the actual amp module out of the cabinet. So now we can get rid of this carcass and do the work that we need to do on this. Okay, so now you've got the actual amplifier itself out. You'll notice here on the back where the fan is that there's these black covers and there's also some other screws. Now don't remove these screws here on the grill. They just hold the grill into the metalwork. The screws we want to take out for the fan are actually under these caps here. And something that I forgot to mention earlier on that you may well need is something to pop them up. So these are just screw covers basically. You can sort of get in with fingernails sometimes, and see that one's just lifted up. And they sort of fold out of the way, like so, and reveal the screw. So you might be able to just pick them up on yours, it depends how well they were put in. Some of the times you do need to get something in and prise them, so I'm going to get a small screwdriver for that. So there's a relatively smallish fat screwdriver, and I'm just going to go in and sort of prise them up here. Like that. There we go. There we go. So all 4 of them off. And once you've got all the screws revealed in there, you know, just want to go in with the screwdriver and take those screws out. The plastic caps will probably spin with the screws and they will come off as well. So just undo them. Take the whole thing off as it stands. This white plastic should stay in the housing. So for the last screw here, you'll want to put your hand inside and hold this piece of metal here. Be careful not to put your fingers in the paste on this chip, the amplifier chip. But just sort of hold this lump of metal there because that is now loose. That's what the fan screws into, is this heatsink. So just put your fingers in sort of either side, maybe something like this with one hand, and with the other get the screwdriver in and undo the screw. And you should notice that it'll become free, completely free now. At which point we can just take the screw out. And now if we head inside, this is completely free. See, that's a bit dusty and dirty. It's also good to give this a clean out. So if you've got a clean paintbrush or compressed air, just give that a clean. I'll do that in a second. And the old fan will be here now, in place on the back. Let's just pull this off, like so. So there's our old fan. You can see these little plastic pieces are sticking through from the back that I said should stay in place. Now this fan is tied to these other cables, so we're going to have to cut it free. And this one has actually had a replacement fan before by the looks of it, because this fan has already got some joints in it here, if we look where them ties are. So somebody's changed this before. But so just get your cutters and carefully cut in the ties, being careful not to cut any of the other cables themselves, to free it, like so. Let's cut this other one over here. There we go. And that one here as well. Okay, so once you've cut the wire free, you'll see there'll be this little connector over here, and just pull that out like that. And then the fan itself is totally free. So at this point now, if you couldn't solder or didn't have access to it, you could take the old fan and the new one to a friend who can, and just say, can you put this connector on the new fan please? And they could do it, then you could put it back in. But okay, so I've now got the new fan and the old fan here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to basically get the new fan, and I'm just going to put the cable up, make sure it's long enough. Probably about here I'm going to cut it. It doesn't matter if it's a bit longer, you just don't want this short. And snip off that connector, that's no use. And then I'm going to cut this cable here. Now there's actually already this joint here. I'm tempted to cut that out and put my joint there instead. And I might, oh, there we go, I can pull this heat shrink off, it's not super tight. But if this was a new fan, obviously this would be a continuous piece, and then I would cut this with a few inches of cable to play with somewhere there. Obviously because of this one being modified before, I'm just going to go with this same spot. So I'm going to cut that there. Like so. We can get rid of our old fan then. And now we've got the old connector and the brand new fan. So some people cut this yellow cable off somewhere. I don't like to leave it too short because it can catch the casing and short out and everything. And while it's not really an issue because it's just like speed reporting, I actually usually heat shrink the positive and negative cables through, and then put an extra layer of heat shrink, this big piece here, over both of them and this to trap it together. I'll show you what I mean anyway. But when you've cut your ends off, just strip them back. So just get the wire cutters and expose some bare cable. And do that on both the new fan, red and black, and the old connector cable. Okay, so now both ends are stripped, so you can see there's the connector with the bare ends, the fan with the bare ends. I'm going to get some solder. I'm just going to heat up and then put a bit of solder on these to pre-tin the cables. Just a little bit like that. Like so, and you can see they've now got solder on the ends of them. Or you could if the camera would focus, but yeah. I'm going to do that to all four. Because this will just make it easier to solder them together. Okay. So all four ends have now got a little bit of solder on them. Notice how I didn't even strip this end back, so if you've got this extra wire, just leave it, don't bother to strip it, just cut it flush. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide the heat shrink on before we solder these. So let's get this little heat shrink tube in, push it over. I'm going to put it right down out the way, because obviously this reacts with heat, and when we solder the cables, they get warm, so the tubing would shrink if you left it up here. So move it right down out the way. I'm then also going to get all three of these wires together and get this bigger piece of tubing and put it across all three. Like so, and I'm even going to put it past the two pieces we've already put on. So it would have probably made more sense to put the big piece on first, but here we are. Anyway, so we've ended up like that. We've got all three within the big piece and then two individuals within a piece of their own. We've got our connector here. And now we're ready to solder these together basically. So I'm just going to set this down and bend it up a little bit. That should be a closer angle so you can see more of what's going on. And now if I just heat this up, like so, and then come off, that's now soldered through together. Do the same for the negative. And that's also soldered through, like so. So you can see both of them are connected through now. So the next thing to do is pull the first layers of heat shrink tubing on that we put on, and make sure that the solder is in the middle of it, the joint. So like so. And this one as well. Making sure it's well covered. Then get the soldering iron and just put it underneath like this. And warm up the tube, at which point it'll basically shrink itself and seal the connection that we've just soldered together. You could also do this with a heat gun, or some people use a lighter, but the soldering iron generally works fine. It just makes the tubing a little bit dirty, but you're never going to see this anyway where it's going. So we just put the soldering iron under like this, and that is now stuck in place and it won't move. You can see as I'm pulling it, you can see how it's shrunk down into the grooves, or you could if it would focus there. So now we'll slide the extra layer of heat shrink I put on up. I'm going to make sure that this yellow wire is within the other heat shrink here somewhere. You could even double this back if you wanted to on itself, something like that. But then I put this heat shrink over, making sure that it covers those two plus the bare end that we've got there. It's just like an extra layer of protection. You really don't need to do this, but I just like to keep it all neat, contained and tidy. And then we're going to heat shrink this together. Okay, so that is all shrunk now. You can see how it's sort of moulded itself. I'm covered in dirt off that cab, but you can see how it's moulded itself round, or you could if it would focus properly, but there we go, see. So those are now joined, so our new fan is on our old connector, and we're ready to put this back in the amp. So let's get the amp module over here again and screw this back together. Okay, so we've got the amplifier itself back here, got the screws to put the fan in and the new fan. First I'm going to just dust this heatsink here off. So I've just got a clean paintbrush, and I'm just going to do this to get all the dust out. Like so, so that's a lot cleaner. You can also see at this point where the screws go in the fan and how everything's held together. This basically sandwiches the fan in the back, and this is what you're actually screwed into with these back screws. So yeah. So first thing, get the fan. I would position it with the cable coming out of the bottom corner like that. You want the side without the sticker, the side with the exposed blades like this, to the back, because that's where it sucks air in and it blows out the side with the sticker on this frame here. So you want that way, that orientation is what you want. So we'll put this down, and it's going to be kind of hard to show, but those little plastic pieces that stick through there, that you can see, they're actually slightly proud. They will go into these holes on the fan. So we'll put that over, and it'll just sort of give us a positioning for the fan. So you can see there, that's sort of sat in place. Then we get the heatsink and just position this over the fan. Now that's not going to stay in place, but what you're going to have to do is just have a look at the side here and eyeball the grooves so you can see the slat that the screws go into, which is this one here and that one there. You want them lined up with the holes in the fan. You probably also get covered in paste off this, but that'll wipe off. So I would hold that roughly in place, and once you've got that there, get a screw. I'm going to start with the top one because it's probably easier to show you, and put that over. Oh, the fan's dropped off. This is considerably easier when you're not filming it, but put the heatsink over like so, and get the screwdriver, and then just sort of start slightly turning the screw, and you'll feel it'll just sort of pull the heatsink in. So I'm not tightening it all the way yet, but I'll just show you properly because I don't know how well you can see. But I'll just show you here because I don't know how well you can see. I've just done that screw up enough to bite, and that is now sort of fixed in position. You can actually see the screw thread in that gap as well, or I can. It's probably quite dark in there, I don't know whether. Once you've got one in, the rest are fairly easy. I would be inclined to do the diagonal corner to the one you did. So if you start in the top right, do the bottom left next, and again just get the fan just start to tighten the screw, give it that little bit of a jiggle, so just give the heatsink a bit of a movement and turn that screw, and you'll start to feel it biting in and it'll start to tighten up. Once you've got two in, you can actually tighten them most of the way, like so. So I'll go back to the first one. Them are relatively tight. Let's put the top one in. And then we can also get that last one in and make sure everything is secure. So that's quite tight. That one's quite tight. Be careful not to over tighten these because you are just threading into that channel in the heatsink. So you just want them secure enough that this isn't going to move, and you can see now that's firm and secure and it won't wiggle loose. Once you've got it screwed in, you can pop all these covers back over the screws on the back, the little plastic flaps, like so. And that's them done with. So now we just need to plug this in, and also I'm going to put a couple of cable ties back in. Okay, so I've just got a couple of spare zip ties, cable ties, whatever, and I'm just going to put the connector in first, and then we'll cable tie it in a couple of places to keep it out of the way of everything and neat. So pay attention to this connector. You'll notice it's got a little groove on it, and the corners are also rounded. If you look at the socket in the board, if you look at the socket on the board where it came from, you'll notice that those grooves will match and the cutouts. So we can see how the corners are rounded, and the corners are rounded there. So just check that it's lined up, put it over and push it in, like so. That should be secure. Now I'm just going to dress this in. Just to keep things neat, I'm going to put this tie back around the wires here and strap them together. Like so. And then I'm going to put another one over here somewhere. Not that it really needs it, but it just keeps things neat and tidy. So there we go. I'm going to cut those down with the cutters, and we're done. So that's it for the work in the amplifier itself. Now we've just got to put this back into the chassis. So I'll get the cab. Okay, so with the cabinet itself back, let's now get the amplifier back in. So I've got the 4 screws, complete with the washers on them already. And I'm just going to put it in the hole just a little bit like that, but not push it in, because obviously it'll get in the way, just for the back two. So like that. And now that's ready, we can feel underneath there's no screw to slot the amp in. So get the amplifier, and then as before just hold it up and guide it in. Might require a little bit of a jiggle. You might also need to get your fingers around the front and hold the knobs and guide it into place, and it should slot in like so. Still be a little loose, but when it's in the right position at the front all the way, you should then be able to just put these screws in like so. Might need a bit of movement like this to get it right, but once one goes in like that, don't fully tighten it, just leave it a little loose. Get the other one in. You can even do them finger tight to get started, but there we go, that's the back two in. It's now supporting itself. I've not tightened them up yet. I'm going to put the front ones in. So let's just get the front ones and put them over. And they should just go straight in. You can actually tighten the front ones up from the get-go. You might just want to push the back a little bit just to make sure it stays aligned. Get them all the way tightened. And then you can tighten the back ones up. And that's the amp in place. Don't forget to plug the speaker back in if it's a combo that you're using. And now let's connect the power and have a listen. And it's on, nice and quiet. And that's now on nice and quiet, as you can see. Very little noise. Turn that off. And there you go. So yeah, that's basically it for this video. It was a relatively quick and easy one. Just take your time when you're doing it, obviously, and if you can't solder, try and find a friend that can, because it's much better to have it soldered and heat shrink like I've just shown you, than to use connector blocks or twisting and botching it on something like this, especially if you're using it for live performances. If you like this video, please leave a like. Any questions, put them in the comment section down below, and get subscribed for future random repair and technology and gig videos just like this one. Thanks for watching.